All right, so then I got a black ex-girlfriend, but I'm not going to go into details about her because, I don't feel like doing that now. But basically, I tried to get her pregnant too because, again, I was seeing things through the Darwinian lens. And I'll discuss how I kind of broke free of that. But so basically, I started to recognize, like I said, at the time when I was, my ex was getting their restraining order against me. I was posting stuff online about how, I saw things through Darwinian lens. So like, how cheaters or like, there's physical cheating and there's emotional cheating. And like emotional cheating would be like if you're texting somebody and you say that I love you, but a physical cheating would be actually physically having sex. And apparently men are more concerned with the physical cheating because they're concerned with paternity, paternity of their children. And if a man physically cheats with his girl, then he's not sure of the paternity. But women are more concerned with emotional cheating because they're certain of paternity, but they don't want the man to be in love with another woman and not give her the resources, but give the other woman the resources, right? So a woman is more upset if a man is texting another woman and says, I love you, whereas a man's more upset if the woman has sex with another man. But again, like I saw this as like evidence of Darwinism. Like, see, it's Darwinism. Darwinism shapes our reality. And religion's an epic phenomenon of Darwinism, and everything centers around Darwinism. But I'm going to get to how I started to, how my grandpa's teaching started to make me understand it, because my grandpa, what he taught me, and I'll get to this later, he would say, yes, okay, there could be some instinctual aspects of things, quote unquote Darwinism, but according to existential metapsychiatry, you can transcend that and you can be responsible for your actions. And the idea is, you see, I saw things through a Darwinian lens. So I justified trying to have babies out of wedlock. And it didn't work out with both of my exes, my black ex and my white ex, right? And in both cases, it was kind of it ended up really bad. But again, it wouldn't have ended up so bad if it wasn't for the fact that my mom and dad had abandoned me. And in both cases, my exes didn't respect me because of that. And it led to a lot of problems, right? But, so it might have worked out if I had my parents' support and stuff. But regardless, one of the reasons why I wanted to have babies with both of them was to get my parents to see me again, right? I was thinking if I had a baby, that would happen. But the other aspect was, I wanted to be superior. I saw things through a Darwinian lens. So, I saw things through a Darwinian lens. So I justified what my grandpa would call existentially invalid behaviors, which would be like having a baby out of wedlock, or, trying to have sex with these women and trying to get them pregnant so that I can have a baby. And, and that's what I wanted, was to have a baby. But, there were other components to it. Like I said, I thought that the baby would help me get back in contact with my mom and dad and stuff. But at the same time, like, because my mom and dad weren't talking to me, my exes didn't respect me as a part of it. Also, my swag flow was off and stuff. But my exes didn't respect me. And, it's just a sad situation. But my point is, though, I started to understand my grandpa's existential metapsychiatry teachings much later. And the way that I started to understand it was I started piecing it together, and I started realizing my grandpa would say that everything is one, everything is energy. And instead of seeing things as Darwinian, you see life as an anti-entropic rewarding function. And then, therefore, you don't try to be superior by having children, not superior, inferior software. And that's still the illusion that you're a separate self. But you want to be a beneficial presence. And a part of being a beneficial presence would be, like I said, with the black ex, she was a prostitute when I first met her. She was on the streets doing prostitution, but she said she just started. She was 19 years old. She just started. So, and I tried to have a baby with her, but, I made sure that she didn't have an STD and stuff. I took her to the clinic or whatever, but I took her to the Planned Parenthood. She got tested and everything, but, I wasn't thinking straight, I wasn't in discernment. I just wanted to have a baby. And yeah, I liked her. She cleaned for me. She cooked for me. She did all this stuff for me. And she was cool and I liked her. But at the same time, like, things fell apart when she realized that my parents weren't talking to me and, all this stuff. But, I tried to get her pregnant. But again, I wasn't in discernment. And I wasn't thinking, okay, if I get these girls pregnant, they're going to be single moms. It's not going to be good for the baby. These women are not the highest quality women that you could be with, and you're not married to them. You're not thinking in terms of beneficial presence. I was thinking in terms of just being superior. And my grandpa would say, there's a difference between being a beneficial person and a beneficial presence. Because like my grandpa would say, if you want to give to people, so this is what I started to understand. So my grandpa started teaching me again. And this is what he's kind of taught me, that where I started to understand his teachings that were anti-Marxist. So my grandpa, so finally he taught me. He was like, I was studying with him, and he was telling me about how, giving to the poor doesn't necessarily help the poor, but he said that it helps you to give. So, like I asked him about the story where, there's the corners of the field and the Israelites would let the poor get from the corners of the field. My grandpa would say, Jordan Peterson says that that's a metaphor of the corners of the field represents your ego and the boundaries of your ego. And you don't want to have a very rigid ego. So you want to allow the edges to be trimmed from. So again, it's not necessarily about giving to the poor. It's a ritual. And my grandpa say any ritual will help you to get deeper insight, and following any ritual helps you break out of yourself. But then also my grandpa, I asked my grandpa, I told my grandpa how, in Israel, people always give to the poor. When I went to Israel, that's what the rabbi taught me. Like, even if there's a poor man, give him a quarter or give him a penny. But, so I was like, that's about giving to the poor. It's about being loving to the poor. But my grandpa would say, that's not necessarily helping the poor. It helps you. My grandpa would say, by letting go of your attachments, only if it's a ritual. But if you're doing it in order to please God, then again, that's self-confirmatory. You're still stuck in the self. And you're not transcending the self, and you're not open to inspiration. You're not open to the flow. But if you're giving as a ritual and to let go of attachments, then that could be beneficial. But so this is what when I started to kind of understand it was my grandpa. So I was confused about this, but my grandpa said, okay, why is it important to let go of attachments? Because if you're in the flow, you're not attached to anything. Like, if you're not in the flow, you have your things planned out. And again, that there's pride and there's vanity and there's also ambition, where you're looking at your achievements. You're looking in the past at your goals, at your achievements, and you're trying to achieve certain things, as opposed to being open to the truth, which is beyond your comprehension, open and beyond your expectation. My grandpa says the flow is an expected surprise. So if you're trying to make things happen, right, and you're not in the flow, then you're not open to inspiration, you're not open to the truth. And if you're attached, you're not open to the truth. But by the ritual of giving 10%, you don't, like I said, I learned from a rabbi that you're not supposed to give more than 10% because you don't want to make yourself destitute, because that's not the flow, right? And that can still be self-confirmatory, like, oh, I'm destitute, look at how poor I am. Oh, and then that could be self-confirmatory. But you only want to give 10% because you don't want to become destitute. You want to give. It's a ritual to help you let go of your attachments. Because again, when you're attached, now you're not in the flow. Because any time of attachment, you're not open to the truth. You're not open to inspiration. You want to be free flowing. But again, But if you're doing it to give to the poor, to help them, again, you're still trying to be a good person. My grandpa would say, you're still trying to be a good person. You still believe that that person is a separate person, and it doesn't necessarily help the separate person. You're still trying to be a good person. You still think that you're a separate person. But my grandpa would say, no, there is no separate person. There is no self. You are a beneficial presence. You are a presence, and everything is one. There is no thing. And by giving, by the ritual of giving, you don't want to, but the ritual of always, giving or whatever, that can help you to transcend the ego, and any ritual can help you transcend the ego to the flow. But again, like I said, in my mind, when I'm hearing transcend the ego, I'm like, okay, well, that's give to the poor. That's be for race mixing. So like, I'll give another example. Like, I was with my friend Bill, or I'm not gonna say the person's name, but I was with one of my friends, and he was saying the N word and the K word. He kept on saying N word, K word, and he was like, what's up with blacks and Jews are destroying America, type of thing. And in my mind, I was always like, dude, you're racist. You're a white supremacist. You're in the ego. You're not in the flow. And that's the way I always saw it. But then I started to realize, I'm for race mixing, and I'm against white people. So I'm not in the flow either. So I'm as not in the flow as the racist is. Being anti-racist is not being as not in the flow as the racist. So I started to recognize this. And so then my friend who was asking me, like, why is it that a lot of Jews are so into like sexuality and like, anti-morality, being hypersexual and stuff. And I said, and this is in the same thing with black people, and it's because black people and Jews are victims, and so they become Satanists. And what I mean by Satanists is it's the worship of Shukracharya, it's the worship of Shiva, the god of destruction, and because they see themselves as victims, they say, well, they don't want to be on the side of God and the side of Vishnu, preservation, because that's the conservative, that's religion, that's the status quo, that's white supremacy, that's conservatism. But if you're a victim, you don't want to be conservative. You want to be against the white man. You want to be against the status quo. If you're the victim. So they become Satanists, and that's what Satan's about. He's a rebel. He's about being against the status quo. But my grandpa would say that the devil is dualistic software and making things happen. And like I said, but I was like, dualistic software is transcending the ego and being for race mixing. But no, that's still dualistic software. That's still, my grandpa would call it an ego strategy. Or my grandpa would call it, trying to make things happen, or experiential thinking, experience-based thinking. And experience is not based on reality, because experience is based on the senses, and the senses do not tell you reality. And it's still confirming the illusion that there's a separate self. So, so I started to realize, okay, so giving is not necessarily helping. The only thing it can help is it can help you to let go of attachments. And why let go of attachments? So that you could be open to inspiration, so you could be in the flow. But it's not to be a good person. It's to be a beneficial presence, so you could be in the flow. And my grandpa would say, sometimes giving is beneficial. If you're in the flow, you can discern when it's appropriate to give. And it's not just a ritual. But you have to be in the flow, and you have to have clear discernment. And my grandpa would say, part of the flow is comprehensivity. My grandpa would say a passion for comprehensivity, contemplation, and completely, growing your awareness and constantly learning and constantly studying, and then so developing your consciousness so that you can be open to the truth, open to inspiration. So that's what I started to realize after the abortion, because I started to realize, okay, I was in a Darwinian sense. I still believed I was a separate self, and I wanted to be superior, and I wasn't in clear discernment, and I was trying to be superior, and I wasn't thinking properly, and I was using these women to have a baby, both of the women, and it hurt them and it hurt me, and so I wasn't in the flow. And as my grandpa says, it's not existentially valid. But when I start seeing my grandpa would say, instead of Darwinism, you see things as the anti-entropic reordering function, and you see everything as energy, and that there is no thing. And instead, you want to be a beneficial presence. You want to be a harmonious, beneficial presence, and that's an aspect of that is oneness consciousness, and a part of that is compassion. And that's what my mom doesn't understand. My mom thinks that my grandpa's teachings is, make everyone independent and be callous and be impersonal. My grandpa says that my mom thinks that impersonal is transpersonal, but no, transpersonal is compassion and oneness consciousness, and it's a true lovingness. My grandpa would say it's true love, whereas love, a lot of people think that love is interpersonal, as opposed to transpersonal, where it's like an emotion, and like I love my fellow Jews, so I'm gonna give to the black people so that they can destroy the white people. That would be love. That was the love that I wanted. That I thought that was love, but that was my ego. Whereas if I'm in the flow, that I would transcend predator-prey software like that, and I would see the oneness. I would be in oneness consciousness, and I started to realize, and this happened when the October 7th attack hit, because I started to realize my whole life I've been trying to save the Jews by race mixing the white. I wanted to race mix the white people, but then I started to realize in my attempt to defeat the white people, in my predator-prey software orientation toward white people, I'm trying to save the white people. I'm trying to save the Jews, but you end up, as my grandpa said, Paul said, the good I would, I do not. That which I would not, I end up doing, because it's my calculative thinking. It's my ego, and it backfires. So I'm trying to save the Jews, but in my attempt to save the Jews, I end up destroying the Jews, because I'm not in the flow. I'm not in oneness consciousness. I'm not in pure awareness. I'm still in dualistic software, predator-prey, impersonal orientation, trying to hurt people, trying to hurt the white people, and I'm still stuck in the ego, stuck in the illusion that I'm a separate self, as opposed to oneness consciousness, a lovingness consciousness. And that's where my grandpa would say, if you are in oneness consciousness, everything is one. And, that is true compassion. That's true love. So that's what I was trying to get to. But it's not like an emotional type of love, because that's connected to the body and the illusion of the body. If my grandpa say, if you're in the flow, you transcend experience, because experience is based around the illusion of the separate self and your senses and your emotions and your feelings. My grandpa, if you're in the flow, you might have feelings, but you're definitely not attached to them. So I started to understand my grandpa's teachings, because he started to teach me again after the baby died, So, and that's where I'm at now at this point. But then my grandpa ended up dying. But so maybe I'm going to stop all my lectures at this point. That's where I'm at this point, where I started to kind of understand my grandpa's teachings, and I'm starting to break free of. So I started to realize, why was I so into Darwinism? Because it was anti-religion. And why was I into Marxism? Because it was anti-religion. I saw religion as white supremacy. And why was I like that? Because I saw myself as Jewish, and I wanted to save the Jews. But I wasn't in the flow. But I didn't understand that. But my grandpa would say it was because of my way of seeing. I still saw myself as a separate self, and I still was attached to the ego identity, as opposed to being in non-dual consciousness and oneness consciousness, non-attachment, where I'm not a Marxist because I want to save the Jews and destroy the white people, but because you're not a Marxist in that point. Now you're transcending the ego and you're in oneness consciousness, and you can discern what's appropriate. And yes, doesn't mean I don't give as a ritual to help me to transcend the self. But, my grandpa told me he thought that I should become an Orthodox Jew because he said that Orthodox Judaism has a lot of rituals and stuff that are good that can help you to transcend the self and get into the flow. And my grandpa thought it'd be good to rebuild the temple. He told me, because I asked him, what do you think about rebuilding the temple? He said, yeah, that'd be good. Because the rituals of the temple would help people to get in the flow. So maybe, if I go to Israel, hopefully I can rebuild the temple, But I'm trying to think what else. So, I went through a lot of suffering, and now I recognize a lot of the suffering had to do with my way of seeing, where I saw things with Darwinian, Marxist, Freudian perspective. And why? Because I was anti-religion. Because I wanted to save the Jews, because I saw myself as Jewish. Now I recognize, okay, I recognize my grandpa's, and I thought that my grandpa was anti-religious too. He confused me, but now I realize, okay, he's spiritual, and he's about expanding your awareness, and constant studying, constant inquiry, and getting into the flow, getting into oneness consciousness, and a part of that is through rituals and stuff, But so. Yeah, I'm starting to realize, and I think that a part of it too was when I was with my black ex. She I'm not gonna get into details about that, but she ended up having a miscarriage when I tried to have a baby with her because she was smoking weed. But I'm not gonna get into details about that. But that was another traumatic event. But I remember I was sitting with her and we were watching she was watching a show on Darwinism, and the woman who was talking was wearing a heavy metal, like rock artist shirt. Rock music, right? And my grandpa told me that type, he's not into that type of music. He's more into music that, like Mozart, that helps you transcend the self, that soothes the mind and helps you to transcend thinking. Because my grandpa say thoughts come from the ego, come from the self. Now, like I said, I was always against that because I was always like, no, you're just like you want people to be like Buddhists and just meditate so that they can accept things. But no, that's not my grandpa saying. My grandpa's saying to transcend the thoughts so you can get to inspiration, get to the truth. So, because the thoughts are shaped by the ego. But I remember we were watching this thing, and another thing that my grandpa said, I thought he was a white supremacist because he didn't like opera, but he liked Mozart, but he didn't like opera. And I was like, yeah, well, because you're a white supremacist and opera's Italian. And because my grandpa said, opera's very emotionalism, and it's too tied to the body, and it's emotionalism, and it's too much dissonance and emotional, and emotion is connected to the ego body. But I was like, yeah, because you're just a white supremacist and you like Mozart instead of the brown opera people. But now I see what he's trying to say. Okay. But so what my I remember when I was with my ex, my black ex, she was watching this thing on Darwinism, and she was an INFJ. I'm an INTP. So we got along well because we had compatible personalities. But she was watching this thing on Darwinism and evolution. And the woman in the thing was wearing like rock. The woman who was talking was wearing like rock, and there was a guy too, and they were like rock. They're into like the satanic rock groups. And remember, when my grandpa wasn't into that like jazz and rock music, I was like, yeah, because you're white supremacist, and people say that rock music came from black people and it's satanic. But yeah, black is connected to Satanism. The sensualism of jazz music and stuff, right? Because it's anti-Vishnu. It's more pro Shiva and more dissonance because it's more destructive. But my grandpa would say there is no formula for the flow. You can get in the flow through destruction. You can get in the flow through that stuff. And even you can get yourself more in trouble, right? But there's no formula for the flow. And I'm not going to get on the details. But I started to realize, this woman was into Darwinism. And even my ex who had the abortion, I remember we went to this mammoth place, wherever that place is, La Brea Tar Pits. And, people who believe in Darwinism and evolution and stuff. But a part of the reason why people do want that is because they want to be anti-religious and anti-spiritual. Now, my grandpa would say that he isn't necessarily opposed to the idea of Darwinism and stuff, but my grandpa would say that things are moving anti-entropic ordering function toward the kingdom of heaven. But, regardless, it doesn't matter. My point, though, is, I think that my ex wanted to believe in Darwinism, too. And she was kind of a Satanist, and she was into prostitution, and she was black, and she was kind of, the bad girl stuff, right? Like free sexuality type of stuff. Those both of my exes, right? And maybe she was into Darwinism because it's anti-religion, anti-Vishnu, anti-God, right? And so she wasn't really in the flow. And I was in the flow, and that's why maybe I was attracted to her, because I was in the Darwinian mindset. I wanted to have a baby so I could be superior. Same thing with her, as opposed to trying to get into oneness consciousness. But also, she, but at the same time, we're works in progress, right? But my point is, I started to understand my grandpa's teachings, and I think that I have a lot better understanding of my grandpa's teachings now. And I understand why I was into Darwinism, why I was into Freudianism. The idea, I wanted to believe that the Bible was just an Oedipal complex, and the story of the Garden of Eden was just about the Oedipal complex, where the Garden of Eden represents the womb, and then you leave the womb, but you want to go back to the womb. Now, my grandpa would say that, yeah, maybe that could represent the flow, but I wanted to denigrate religion, and I wanted to believe in the materialistic viewpoint, and I wanted to be superior and have a lot of babies and be in a Darwinian mindset. But now I understand what my grandpa's saying about being a beneficial presence and the oneness consciousness, and seeing everything as energy, and that there is no thing, and not being a Marxist, because I'm like, yeah, being Marxist is good. I want to be a good person. Let's give to the poor. But now I start to realize, wait, giving to the poor isn't necessarily good, especially if you have an ego agenda. So I'm starting to understand my grandpa's teachings, but my grandpa died. So, but I think I have a better understanding now.